It was just another quiet evening in the small southern town, where the air seemed to hum with a lazy calm. Officer Michael Hale sat in his patrol car, idly tapping his fingers on the steering wheel. To him, this town was his kingdom, a place where his badge gave him the power to rule. But tonight, that power was about to face something it had never encountered before. His eyes narrowed when a sleek black car rolled up in front of a fancy restaurant. The car was pristine, expensive. Too expensive, Hale thought. For someone like her. Out stepped a woman, tall and graceful, dressed in a sharp black suit that seemed tailored to perfection. Her every move was deliberate, confident. Something about her sent a wave of irritation through Hale. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't rushing. She acted as if she owned the place. Who does she think she is? Hale thought, his jaw tightening. The sirens flashed red and blue as he pulled up behind her car. The woman didn't flinch. Instead, she calmly glanced back, her expression unreadable. Hale hated that. Her calmness, her composure. It made him feel small. He stomped out of his car, his boots hitting the pavement with authority. "Your papers," he barked, not even bothering with a hello. The woman tilted her head slightly, unfazed. "Is there an issue, officer?" she asked, her voice smooth, almost disarming. "You're parked illegally," Hale shot back, though the sign clearly allowed parking. "I'm just here to pick up my dinner," she replied, handing over her documents. "I didn't think that was against the law." That tone, polite but firm, it grated on Hale's nerves. He hated it when people didn't crumble under his scrutiny, and she wasn't even flinching. "Where are you from? What do you do? How do you afford a car like this?" he demanded, stepping closer, his questions more like accusations. The woman didn't even blink. "I don't believe I'm required to answer any of that unless I've done something wrong." The crowd that had begun to gather on the sidewalk was silent, holding their breath. This wasn't just a traffic stop anymore. It was something else entirely, and everyone could feel it. Hale's blood boiled. Who was this woman, standing there with her head high, not cowering under his badge? He stepped closer, his hand already reaching for his cuffs. "You think you're better than me?" he hissed under his breath. "Turn around. You're under arrest." Phones were out now, cameras rolling. The woman didn't resist as Hale grabbed her arm roughly, but her calm, steady voice cut through the air like a blade. "You don't know what you're doing, officer," she said softly, her eyes locking onto his. "But you're about to find out." Those words hung in the air, heavy and electric. The crowd murmured, whispers spreading like wildfire. "Wait, isn't that?" Hale didn't hear them. He was too caught up in the rush of control, too blinded by his need to dominate. But this was no ordinary arrest, and the woman in cuffs wasn't just anyone. The question wasn't if Hale's world was about to collapse. The question was how bad the fallout would be. The crowd was growing larger by the second, the air buzzing with tension as murmurs rippled through the bystanders. Phones were pointed at Officer Hale, their cameras capturing every rough twist of the woman's arms as he locked the cuffs in place. But even with her hands restrained and her face pressed against the hood of her car, she didn't lose her composure. "Let me warn you one last time," she said, her voice calm but cutting through the noise like a knife. "You're making a mistake you can't take back." Her words felt more like a prophecy than a plea, but Hale brushed them off. Mistake? The only mistake here, in his mind, was letting someone like her think she could walk into his town, flaunting her money and her attitude. "You don't tell me how to do my job," he spat, tightening the cuffs just a little too hard. The crowd's whispers turned into louder murmurs now. Doesn't he know who she is? Why isn't anyone stopping this? This is going to blow up? Hale's ears were ringing, but not from the crowd. It was the thrum of his own arrogance drowning everything else out. He didn't care who this woman thought she was. To him, she was just another person who needed to be taught a lesson. A man in the crowd stepped forward hesitantly, his voice trembling. "Officer, maybe you should." "Step back," Hale barked, his voice sharp and loaded with authority. The man froze, his courage evaporating under Hale's glare. The woman shifted slightly, tilting her head just enough to catch Hale's eye. "You think you have the upper hand," she said softly, almost as if she pitied him. But you're not ready for what comes next. For the first time, Hale hesitated. Something about her tone unsettled him. It wasn't fear. It wasn't even anger. It was certainty, like she knew something he didn't. Before he could respond, the sound of another police car screeching to a halt broke the tension. Heads turned as Captain James Morton stepped out, his face a mixture of confusion and alarm. The moment his eyes landed on the woman, his expression darkened. "Michael." Morton's voice was sharp, his tone carrying the weight of authority Hale rarely heard directed at him. "What's the problem, Captain?" Hale asked, straightening up, though his grip on the woman didn't loosen. "I'm handling a suspect acting suspiciously." Morton didn't answer immediately. His gaze flicked to the woman, then back to Hale, and the look in his eyes sent an icy chill through the air. "Do you know who she is?" Morton asked quietly, his voice low but laced with warning. Hale's confidence didn't waver, at least not yet. "I don't care who she is," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "She's just another one of those types thinking they can do whatever they want." The crowd gasped audibly at his words. Morton's jaw tightened, his face pale with anger. The woman, however, remained unnervingly calm, her eyes fixed on Morton now. "You might want to explain to your officer who I am," she said, her voice cool as ice but with an edge that could cut steel. Morton stepped forward, his voice urgent now. "Michael, take the cuffs off. Now." Hale froze. The sharpness in Morton's voice wasn't just an order. It was a lifeline, an attempt to salvage whatever was left of the situation. But Hale hesitated, his pride battling with the unease creeping into his gut. "What's going on, Captain?" he demanded, his voice faltering slightly. Morton leaned in, his voice low but firm. "You've just arrested Judge Victoria Harper, a Supreme Court judge." The world seemed to tilt for Hale as the weight of Morton's words hit him like a freight train. His grip on the cuffs slackened, and for the first time, he realized he wasn't in control of this situation. The crowd erupted into a cacophony of whispers, gasps, and shouts. The name Judge Harper rippled through them like a spark igniting a blaze. But the woman, Judge Harper, didn't flinch. She turned her head slightly, her calm gaze boring into Hale like she could see straight through him. "You wanted to know who I am, Officer Hale," she said, her voice steady. "Now you do." The camera zoomed in closer, capturing every detail of Hale's pale face and Judge Harper's unyielding composure. Morton was already moving to release her cuffs, his hands shaking slightly as he muttered an apology. But the damage was done, and everyone, including Hale, knew it. As Morton stepped back, the judge adjusted her jacket, her movements slow and deliberate. Then, for the first time, she turned fully to face Hale. "You're about to learn," she said, her voice calm but sharp as a razor. "That power isn't something you wear on your chest. It's something you earn. And you, Officer Hale, just lost it all." The crowd was silent now, the weight of her words sinking into everyone who stood there. The question wasn't just what would happen next, it was how far the fallout would go. For a brief moment, silence hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. Judge Harper stood tall, her composure unshaken, while Officer Hale's confidence visibly crumbled. His fingers twitched nervously at his side, his gaze darting between the judge, the captain, and the sea of phones recording his every move. The crowd, which had fallen eerily quiet, erupted into a wave of voices. "Did you hear that? She's a Supreme Court judge. This man's career is over. Justice is about to be served right here." Hale's face turned crimson, a mix of rage, panic, and humiliation fighting for dominance. The realization of who he had just manhandled, and in front of dozens of cameras, crashed over him like a tidal wave. "Captain Morton," Hale stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know." "You should have known, Michael," Morton snapped, his tone colder than a winter wind. "But you didn't stop to think, did you? You let your prejudice take over, and now we're all going to pay the price for your arrogance." The captain's words were like daggers, and Hale felt every one of them cut deep. His mind scrambled for an excuse, some way to justify his actions, but there was nothing, no defense that could hold up against the weight of what he'd just done. Judge Harper, her her expression still calm but her eyes blazing with quiet fury, stepped forward. The crowd instinctively parted, giving her space as she approached Hale. "You wanted control," she began, her voice steady and deliberate, each word slicing through the tension like a scalpel. "You thought you could intimidate me, humiliate me, and assert your so-called authority. But all you've done is reveal exactly who you are." Hale opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He felt like a puppet with its strings cut, his bravado reduced to ashes under the judge's piercing gaze. The crowd, sensing a reckoning unfolding before them, leaned in closer. The atmosphere was electric, every bystander holding their breath as they watched the judge dismantle Hale with nothing more than her words. "You see, Officer Hale," Harper continued, her voice rising just enough for everyone to hear, "power doesn't come from a badge or a uniform. It comes from justice, from respect, and from the truth. And today, the truth has exposed you for what you are, a man unfit for the responsibility that badge represents." The crowd roared in agreement, their cheers echoing down the street. Hale's face drained of color, the weight of public scrutiny bearing down on him like an anvil. Morton stepped in, his hand raised to quiet the crowd. "That's enough," he said, his voice firm but not commanding. He turned to Harper, his expression one of genuine remorse. "Judge Harper, I can't apologize enough for what's happened here today. Rest assured, this matter will not go unresolved." Harper regarded Morton for a moment, her eyes softening slightly. "I'll accept your apology, Captain," she said, her tone measured. "But understand this isn't just about one bad officer. It's about a system that allows this kind of behavior to thrive. And that system needs to change." Her words hung in the air, resonating with the crowd. People began murmuring in agreement, their phones still capturing every second of the unfolding drama. Suddenly, one of the reporters who had arrived earlier pushed forward, her microphone outstretched. "Judge Harper, do you intend to press charges?" she asked, her voice cutting through the noise. Harper turned to the reporter, her expression unreadable. "I intend to ensure that justice is served," she said simply. "Not just for me, but for every person who's been silenced, mistreated, or ignored because of their race, their gender, or their background." The reporter pushed further. "Does that mean this officer will face consequences?" Harper's gaze flicked back to Hale, who was now standing stiff as a board, his jaw clenched and his eyes staring at the ground. "He'll face the consequences of his own actions," she said, her voice firm. "But this isn't just about him. It's about making sure no one else has to endure what I did today." The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers ringing out like thunder. Hale flinched at the sound, his mind racing as he tried to process the enormity of what had just happened. But Harper wasn't done. She turned back to the crowd, her voice rising with conviction. "This is our moment," she declared. "Our moment to demand accountability, to dismantle injustice, and to build a system that serves everyone. If we stay silent, nothing will change. But if we stand together, we can create a future where stories like mine are a thing of the past." The crowd's applause grew louder, their cheers echoing down the street and drawing even more attention to the scene. Reporters scrambled to capture every word, every gesture, every reaction. Meanwhile, Hale stood frozen, the weight of his actions pressing down on him like a mountain. He could feel the eyes of the crowd on him, their judgment as sharp as a blade. As Harper walked back to her car, Morton turned to Hale, his expression grim. "You've got a lot to answer for, Michael," he said quietly. "And I don't just mean to me." Hale didn't respond. He couldn't. All he could do was watch as Harper drove away, her calm demeanor in stark contrast to the chaos she left in her wake. But deep down, he knew this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning of the storm. And when it hit, it would leave no part of his life untouched. The next morning, the city buzzed with the fallout from the viral incident. Social media platforms were flooded with clips, hashtags like #JusticeForAll and #accountability now trending worldwide. News outlets dissected every moment, every word spoken in that tense exchange. Judge Harper's courage had sparked a fire that could no longer be ignored. In his cramped apartment, Officer Hale sat slumped on his couch, his phone vibrating endlessly on the table in front of him. He hadn't dared to look at it, knowing that the calls and messages weren't in his favor. Headlines blared across his television screen. Judge Harper calls for systemic reform and abuse of power exposed. His world, once comfortably untouchable, was now unraveling thread by thread. Meanwhile, in her quiet office, Judge Harper sat surrounded by letters and emails. Some from those thanking her for standing up, others sharing their own stories of injustice. A determined glint lit up her eyes. She knew this wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who'd ever been silenced. By evening, a peaceful protest filled the streets. People of every background marched together, carrying signs demanding reform. Judge Harper joined them, her presence like a beacon of hope. Cameras captured her walking side by side with strangers who now looked to her as a symbol of resilience. In the days that followed, Captain Morton kept his promise. A full investigation into Hale's actions was launched, but it didn't stop there. The department announced sweeping changes, mandatory bias training, stricter oversight, and a commitment to community engagement. It was only the first step, but it was a start. For Officer Hale, however, the consequences were swift and merciless. He was stripped of his badge and faced legal action for his conduct. His fall from grace served as a warning to others who believed they could act without accountability. As the city began to heal, one thing became clear. This was a turning point, not just for Judge Harper, but for everyone. The ripple effect of that one moment, standing up to injustice, was proof that a single act of courage could ignite a movement. What would you have done in Judge Harper's place? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective can inspire someone else to take a stand. And hey, if you believe in standing up for justice and making a difference, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us and helps us keep creating impactful content like this. Together, we can amplify voices and demand change.